It's Monday morning, 8:30. The phones are turned on now in our GP practice. And in light of Boris's announcement yesterday, I suspect we're going to have a very, very bad day at work.
Fuck this government. Quick scat, but there's bad stuff you need to hear after the tune. Dot rotten banger, is that fellas? Doctors and nurses. Let's get this service. Doctors and nurses. Doctors and nurses. Boris out blurting, bursting the servers. Overworked workers, vaccine vermin. Billions herding, bland epidermis, anti-vax shirkers. They're birthing the curses, insulate the learners. Greta, take the girth in. Me and my verse in, I'll protect the herd. Your absurdness, hurting the service, plebs in the hurt bricks. That's us, not the shirkers. Parliament pervers, balls drop down that curtain. You look like a twerp was fucking twerking. Backbench bursting, backbench bursting. All you lurking, spitting that lurking, irking. All you lurking, spitting that irking. Stop fucking smirking, you're not working. Tuck that fucking jerkin and a t-shirt, you're fucking bursting. Entendres, I'm fucking murking. You're sat blurting or bled us vermin. The NHS or the NHS service. Your second purses. Always that worthless, broken and bursting. Major would have murked it. You need to herd it. Government turnips, they can't do the learning. Can't do learning. Boris and the burners, secret emerges, parties and perving, parties and perverts, turds were fucking dirty. Kermit's gonna learn in, you're all but bursting. I'm slinging the furnace, Reezy in a sermon, thoughts and the verbs gonna burn them. Not like the herbs you're serving, the hermits with the permits. £150 to fucking get a prescription. No, that's not the cost, that's the permit to get the prescriptions. No prescriptions, it's a permit. Now you shirk it, 5k a month of worthless worth shit. That's the fucking weed they serve it. It's £5,000 for someone for a month. To mute the pain and the curses, we're the persons left to the worthless, while those twerps fucking do what the fuck they like. Scat, that service. Doctors and nurses, Boris out blurting, bursting the servers, overworked workers, vaccine the vermin, billions herding, bled epidermis, anti-vax shirkers. They're birthing the curses, insulate learners. Greta, take this fucking girth in. Me and my verse in, I'll protect the herd. Your absurdness, you're hurting the service, plebs in the herd pricks. That's us, not the shirkers. Parliament pervers. Boss job, comb that fucking curtain. Prick. Parliament pervers, boss job, cunt. Boss job, comb the curtain. Look like twerkers twerking, backbench bursting. All you're lurking, spitting that fucking irking. Stop fucking smirking, you're not working. Tucking that fucking jerkin and a t-shirt, you're fucking bursting. Entendres are fucking murking. You're set to blurring and blurting or bleeding us fucking vermin. Or the NHS service, your fucking second purses. We're sat fucking worthless. Broken and bursting, major would have murked him. You need to herd it and tuck that fucking shirt in. The government turnips, they can't do the learning. Boris and the burners, the secrets emerges, the parties and the perverts. I need better time, but you need to hear this.
Yesterday evening, that there was an expectation that GPs would provide at least 20 million vaccines in the next 2 weeks, because that's really what it is, including bank holidays. But the absolute fear in me, and certainly I expect in many of my colleagues, it feels unachievable. We're already working way beyond capacity. People are burnt out. There aren't even vaccine supplies at times when we have decided we've wanted to vaccinate. Where is all this extra manpower and reserves going to come from? Because general practice is broken. Don't really know what else to say. So it's the end of the day. Went slightly better than expected, but that was, I think, because several of us worked last night, Sunday night, immediately after the government announcement, to get information out to our patients, and on the website and on our social media channels. Which we then updated constantly today, in addition to doing all our routine work and all the urgent on the day work. I'm still confused, along with many of my colleagues, as to how this is going to play out, because we're being told to prioritise the vaccine delivery over non-urgent medical care that a GP would normally provide. But everything that we deal with most days is seen as an emergency in some way, shape or form. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this.
So what John Major at his time came out with this thing, the Nolan Principles, which is quite simple. They talk about things like accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. This is how damaging it is, isn't it? If those principles are not being followed, then we have a problem. In years gone by, people would have resigned.
Yes. Oh, it inflicts reputational carnage on everybody involved in politics and on the House of Commons in particular. I think the significant difference between the John Major era and now is this. Yes, there was all sorts of wrongdoing during the latter stages of John Major's premiership, but nobody ever thought that John Major was a person of anything but unimpeachable integrity and straight dealing. Now, the person who is in charge of the ship is regarded as a serial dissembler, as an habitual liar, as somebody who has made his career through ducking and dodging and diving and dissembling and deceiving people. That's the difference, and that is why it is so incredibly serious and enormously damaging. I'm sorry to say it, but I've known 12 prime ministers in my lifetime, and by a country mile, Boris Johnson is the worst. His natural instinct is not to be open, not to be transparent, not to be accountable, but narcissistically to think, what suits me? How can I extricate myself from this awkward situation? By what means can I arrogate blame somewhere else? This is way below the standard that the British public are entitled to expect. And when people say, well, isn't it important that we focus on the big issues rather than on wallpaper or the cost of a flat? I suppose the answer to that is this. If there isn't a basic level of trust in the most senior minister in the government, it's very difficult to operate a democratic polity at all. That's the problem. This guy stinks in the nostrils of decent people. The unlawful prorogation of Parliament, which I publicly denounced at the time, being the most egregious example. My successor also has implored the Prime Minister to respect the House, to tell the truth, to answer the question, and to acknowledge that he, the Speaker, is in charge in the chamber. The problem is this cuts across the Prime Minister's natural and instinctive sense that he is the person who should always have not merely his say, but his way. And what he's got to learn, however long it takes, is that he has to be accountable to the public. It's not about him having fun or doing what he wants or having an easy life. It's about him honouring his obligations as a public servant.
Prime Minister is facing a backlash from some Conservative MPs after announcing the Plan B restrictions at a time when the government is in crisis over the lockdown Christmas party scandal. One Tory backbencher also called on the Health Secretary to resign as he announced the measures in the Commons.
Well, joining us now, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, who was there at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday. Very good morning to you.
Morning.
What do you think Boris Johnson should do? Because even the Scottish Conservative leader says that the Prime Minister should not continue if he knew about a party and misled the Commons.
Well, the rules are very clear on if you mislead Parliament, then ministers and the Prime Minister is not above the rules. The Ministerial Code says that he would have to resign. But I think here we've got a Prime Minister who, quite frankly, I never felt was fit for office anyway, but has proven over the last couple of months that he isn't. He's undermined it with the Owen Paterson, dodgy contracts. Now we're talking about multiple potential events and parties happening within Number 10 and within his own flat at Number 10. So, you know, he spent the last week after I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary asking for an investigation into the allegations. He spent the week saying nothing to see here, no, it didn't happen. And then, of course, this video emerged, and now he's had to backtrack on that. And I think it just proves that Boris Johnson is a man who has never felt the rules applies to him. But when it's something as serious as a global pandemic, where the science advice and the chief medical officer's advice is very clear, and that the British public have been doing their bit, they've not seen loved ones, people who have died and haven't been able to see their loved ones, and yet the Prime Minister seems to have, just disregarded those rules and think they don't apply to them. So it's upsetting. It's devastatingly upsetting, and it shows that the Prime Minister isn't fit for his office.
Is the Cabinet Secretary the right person to investigate? We understand yesterday Met Police say they aren't going to investigate. I mean, anybody who had a lockdown party or was prosecuted under that legislation will think, well, hang on a moment, how come the police aren't investigating what's happening in Downing Street?
Well, exactly. There'll be a lot of people that are angry because there is prosecutions going through the courts now of people around that time who broke the rules. So I do think the rules have to apply consistently. And I think it's even more important when it's the Prime Minister and Number 10, because they're the ones that set the rules. So I think it's very clear what has to happen now. The Cabinet Secretary has to come forward with the evidence, the CCTV. It can't be that hard to find the information. Over 40 people allegedly was at this party with Christmas jumpers on and Secret Santa. It can't be that hard to find the information. And when the information is there, that it has to be handed over to the Met Police. And when they've got that evidence, they should deal with it as they would do with anybody else who has been flaunting the rules at that time.
Yep.
Angela Rayner, the Prime Minister will say that he's now doing the absolute right thing. He can't make rash decisions and just sack people willy-nilly. He's got to get the evidence. It's got to be a full investigation and a full inquiry. This is what any Prime Minister would do at this point, is what he would say.
He spent the last week saying there wasn't a party, and yet these allegations that there was even a gathering in his own flat. So, I think it's incredulous that he comes to Prime Minister's questions yesterday and says, I'm deeply sorry that one of my senior advisors was laughing and joking about, cheese and wine. I think it's appalling behaviour. I think he had an opportunity to put things right. And yet time and time again, this Prime Minister thinks it's one rule for everybody else and one rule for him and his mates. And I'm sorry, the public now are incredibly cross, and quite rightly so, because they changed their plans, and they did do that on the advice, and it's right to do that, and people should follow the advice of the scientists and the chief medical officer. But Boris Johnson and his advisors and his staff are not above the law, and they have to start acting responsible.
Some of the staff there would say, look, we're working 18, 19-hour days, and at times we may have had a bottle of wine and some cheese at the end of the evening, and there could have been a few of us. That's their argument. Are you confident that has not happened anywhere across the Labour Party? Because the Labour Party will be working long hours. Are you confident that in no office up and down the country that some Labour staff may not, during lockdown, say, we've been working a long time, someone get some wine in, we'll just hang back and have a few drinks before going home? Are you sure that didn't happen?
We were consistent. Both myself and Keir Starmer worked incredibly long hours during the pandemic, as did lots of people up and down this country and businesses. We were consistent as the leadership in our party that there would be no parties, no gatherings. People were working from home, and we were very diligent because we were also concerned to keep our staff safe, because we thought it was important that not only did we follow the rules so the public saw that we saw it as a serious threat and that we had to protect people, but we had a duty of care to our staff to ensure that our workplaces were safe. So we did follow the rules. We were very clear and consistent about those rules. And actually, when we didn't see our loved ones, when we were self-isolating, as Keir had done many times, when our family and friends, I lost my aunt, I lost my uncle through COVID. Everyone went through this. People that are listening to this programme have all got harrowing stories about how they had to make sacrifices. And it doesn't wash with me that the Prime Minister didn't know that there was parties going on at Downing Street. And then for staff to be laughing about it and mocking it, I think the British public are just absolutely furious about it, and quite rightly so.
Bars in the project. I'll run it back with all that, but everyone in the UK needs to hear that shit. Fucking wankers.